The storm should have masked her scent. It didn't. And now, as lightning cracked the sky open like broken bone, the Alpha King stood at the edge of his territory with rain cutting his face and something far more dangerous pooling in his chest, recognition. The kind that made his wolf surge forward, clawing at his ribs, demanding he move faster. Demanding he find her. She was out there. Beyond the gates. Beyond the boundary no wolf should ever cross alone. Especially not in weather like this. The wind screamed through the pines, bending ancient trees like they were nothing, and the rain came down so hard it felt like the earth itself was trying to drown the forest. But he could still smell her. Faint. Fading. A thread of wild jasmine and wood smoke, laced with something metallic and wrong. Blood. His boots hit mud as he crossed the threshold, moving with a speed that would have looked reckless to anyone watching. But no one was watching. The pack was inside, sheltered and warm, celebrating some ritual he'd stopped caring about hours ago. They thought he was brooding in his study. They thought he was alone. They didn't know he'd felt her the moment she'd been cast out. The boundary line shimmered faintly in his vision, ancient magic woven into the land itself, a protection older than any living wolf could remember. And there, slumped against the trunk of a massive oak just outside the glowing barrier, was a figure so still he almost missed her. Almost. But his wolf wouldn't let him miss her. Not now. Not ever. She was curled in on herself, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tight around her middle like she was trying to hold herself together. Her clothes, what was left of them, were soaked through, clinging to a frame that looked too thin, too fragile. Her hair, dark as midnight, hung in wet tangles over her face, but even from here he could see the tremor in her shoulders. The way her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. She was freezing. She was bleeding. And she was guarding the boundary. His chest tightened. Anger flared hot and sudden, burning through the cold rain like wildfire. Because she wasn't just sitting there. She was positioned. Deliberately. Her back to the sacred line, her body angled as though even now, even broken and abandoned, she was defending it. From what? From him? He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the cuts on her arms, the bruising along her collarbone, the way her lips had gone pale. Close enough to hear the faint whimper she tried to swallow when the wind hit her again. And close enough to see the mark on the inside of her wrist. Silver. Faint. Shaped like a crescent moon wrapped in flame. His blood went cold. No, not her. Not the one they'd whispered about in the old stories. The one the elders had been searching for. The one his pack had been warned to watch for and fear. She lifted her head slowly, like even that small movement cost her everything. Her eyes, pale silver, ringed with exhaustion and pain, locked onto his. And for a moment, neither of them moved. The storm raged around them, but the air between them felt impossibly still. She didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't ask for help. She just looked at him like she was waiting for the final blow. Like she'd been waiting for it her whole life. His wolf snarled. Not at her. At whoever had done this. At the pack that had thrown her out here like she was nothing. At the world that had taught her to expect cruelty instead of kindness. He crouched down, slow and deliberate, keeping his movements careful. Non-threatening. Because even now, even shaking and bleeding and half-frozen, she looked ready to bolt. Or fight. Maybe both. Who did this to you? His voice came out rougher than he intended, but he didn't soften it. She didn't need softness. She needed truth. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard, tried again. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. Cracked and raw, like she'd been screaming. I was told to stay outside until dawn. His jaw clenched. By who? She hesitated. Her gaze flicked past him, toward the glowing warmth of the pack grounds in the distance. Toward the place that should have been her sanctuary. The council, she said quietly. They said I failed. I didn't attract a mate at the gathering. So I'm unworthy. Unworthy. The word sat between them like poison. He'd heard the old punishment before. The cruel tradition some packs still clung to, sending unmated wolves out into the elements as discipline, as motivation, as a reminder of their place. But this wasn't just discipline. This was exile disguised as correction. And they'd sent her to the one place no wolf should ever be left alone. The boundary. The sacred ground that protected them all from what lay beyond. The place where the old magic still pulsed, ancient and unforgiving. She wasn't just being punished. She was being used. His eyes narrowed. They wanted me to find you. It wasn't a question. Her silence was answer enough. Because of course they did. They'd known he'd sense her. Known his wolf wouldn't be able to ignore the scent of a distressed female on his land. Known he'd come. And they'd counted on it. But they hadn't counted on one thing. He reached forward, slow and steady, and before she could pull away, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, and for just a second, her eyes went wide with something that looked like shock. "You're not staying out here," he said, his voice low and absolute. "I don't care what they told you." She shook her head, frantic now, her hands coming up to push the coat away even though she was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. No, I can't. I have to stay. I have to guard the line. If I leave, if I cross. If you stay, you'll die." The words hung heavy between them. She stared at him, her breath hitching, and he saw it then, the conflict warring in her eyes. Duty against survival. Obedience against instinct. She'd been taught to obey, but her body was begging her to live. He stood, and before she could protest, he bent and scooped her into his arms. She gasped, her hands clutching at his shirt, but she didn't fight him. Maybe because she didn't have the strength. Maybe because some part of her, buried deep, wanted to be saved. He turned toward the boundary, toward the shimmering line of protection, and felt her stiffen in his arms. "Wait. I'm not leaving you out here. But the boundary will hold." He looked down at her, and his voice softened just enough to let her hear the promise beneath the command. "You're not the one who's going to break it." And with that, he stepped across the line. The magic flared, bright and sudden, a pulse of light that should have burned, should have rejected, should have thrown them both back. But it didn't. It welcomed her. Because the boundary didn't just recognize power. It recognized its guardian. And the Omega in his arms, shivering, bleeding, abandoned, wasn't just some forgotten wolf. She was the last living protector of the land. And by locking her out, the pack had nearly destroyed the only thing keeping them all alive. He felt her breath hitch against his chest as the realization settled over both of them. Then, softly, barely audible over the rain, she whispered two words that changed everything. They knew. He carried her through the rain like she weighed nothing. Like she was something precious instead of the broken, discarded thing the pack had made her believe she was. The boundary's glow faded behind them, but she could still feel it, the hum of ancient magic singing through her bones, recognizing her in a way no living soul ever had. It should have terrified her. It should have confirmed every whispered rumor, every sideways glance, every reason they'd given for keeping her at the edges of pack life. Instead, it felt like coming home. But the arms holding her, those were something else entirely. She'd seen him before. Everyone had. The Alpha King didn't hide. He moved through pack gatherings like a storm front, commanding attention without ever asking for it. Dark hair that fell just past his collar, eyes the color of amber held to firelight, a jawline that looked carved from stone. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often were, sharp edges and contained violence, power that didn't need to be announced because everyone could feel it. His name was Frederick. And she'd spent the last 3 years making sure he never noticed her. Until tonight. "Put me down." Her voice came out steadier than she expected, but her hands betrayed her, still clutching the fabric of his shirt like it was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and uncertain. He didn't slow. Didn't even look at her. Just kept moving through the forest with the kind of confidence that came from knowing every tree, every stone, every shadow. "Not until you're inside. I can walk. You can barely breathe." He wasn't wrong. Her ribs ached with every inhale, and her legs felt like they'd been carved from ice. But pride, stupid, stubborn pride, made her try anyway. She pushed against his chest, and he stopped. Just stopped. In the middle of the rain, in the middle of the forest, like he had all the time in the world. His eyes dropped to hers, and the intensity in them stole what little air she'd managed to gather. "You want down?" His voice was low, almost casual, but there was something underneath it. Something that made her wolf stir for the first time in hours. "Fine. Stand on your own, Marin, and I'll let you walk." Her name. He'd said her name. Not the Omega. Not the failure. Not any of the dozen other things she'd been called in the last year. Marin. Like he'd known it all along. She opened her mouth to ask how, but the moment her feet touched the ground, her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the mud, one arm sliding around her waist, pulling her against him with a gentleness that didn't match the hardness in his expression. "Stubborn," he muttered, but there was no anger in it. Almost something like respect. "I don't need." "Yes, you do." He adjusted his grip, keeping her upright, and this time when he looked at her, there was something raw in his gaze. Something that looked almost like pain. "They left you out there to die, Marin. Or worse, they left you out there as bait. So forgive me if I'm not interested in letting you prove how strong you are right now." Bait. The word settled in her chest like a stone. She'd known on some level. Known that the council's punishment didn't make sense. That leaving her at the boundary, the one place wolves were taught never to cross alone, wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. But hearing him say it out loud made it real. Made it unforgivable. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would they use me to get to you?" Something flickered across his face. Anger, yes, but something deeper. Something that looked like guilt. He lifted her back into his arms, ignoring her weak protest, and started walking again. Faster this time. More purposeful. "Because they're afraid of what I'll do if I find my..." He stopped. Swallowed. Started again. "They're afraid of change. And you, Marin, you're the kind of change that makes old wolves nervous." She didn't understand. Couldn't understand. She was nobody. An Omega who couldn't shift right, couldn't bond, couldn't do any of the things that made a wolf valuable to a pack. She'd been told that her whole life. But the boundary had recognized her. And so had he. "I don't even know you," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because she did know him. Had watched him from the shadows, had seen the way he moved through council meetings with barely concealed frustration, had noticed the way his jaw tightened whenever the elders spoke about tradition and order and the way things had always been done. She'd seen him. The real him. The one who didn't fit the crown they'd forced onto his head any better than she fit the box they'd tried to shove her into. His arms tightened around her, just slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear it over the rain. "I know you." 3 words. 3 words that shouldn't have meant anything. But they landed like a vow. The trees began to thin, and warm light spilled through the darkness ahead. The main house, massive and imposing, all stone and timber and ancient architecture. She could hear voices inside, laughter and music, the celebration still going. They'd locked her out in a storm while they drank and danced. Her stomach turned. Frederick must have felt her tense because he shifted direction, veering away from the main entrance and heading toward a smaller building nestled in the trees. His private residence. She'd never been inside. Most wolves hadn't. "You can't take me there," she said, panic rising. "If they see. Let them see." He kicked the door open, not bothering with anything as civilized as a knock, and the warmth inside hit her like a wall. "I'm done playing their games." He carried her through a sitting room she barely registered, all dark wood and leather, and the scent of cedar, and into a bathroom that was somehow both luxurious and simple. He set her down on the edge of a massive tub, and she swayed slightly, her body still trying to remember how to function. She watched, dazed, as he turned on the water, testing the temperature with his hand, adjusting it until steam began to rise. Then he turned back to her, and for the first time since he'd found her, he looked uncertain. He gestured vaguely at her soaked clothes. Do you need help or? She should have been embarrassed. Should have been mortified. But she was too cold, too tired, too overwhelmed to care about modesty. I can manage, she lied. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But he nodded anyway, moving toward the door. I'll find you dry clothes. Yell if you need me. He was almost out when she found her voice again. Frederick. He stopped, turned, waited. Why are you helping me? For a long moment, he just looked at her. Really looked at her. Like he was memorizing every line of her face, every shadow in her eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like wonder and grief tangled together. Because you've been invisible your whole life, Marin. And I'm the only one who's actually been watching. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. And she was alone in the warmth and steam with the echo of his words wrapping around her like a second coat. He'd been watching. The Alpha King had been watching her. Her hands shook as she peeled off her ruined clothes, as she sank into water hot enough to hurt, as she finally let herself feel the weight of everything that had happened. They'd tried to destroy her. And instead, they delivered her straight into the arms of the one wolf who might actually see her as something more than a mistake. The question was, what did he see? And more terrifying still, what would he do when he discovered what she really was? Because the mark on her wrist was starting to burn. And the ancient magic thrumming through her blood was finally beginning to wake up. The water should have soothed her. It didn't. Marin sank deeper into the heat, letting it swallow her up to her chin, but her mind refused to quiet. Refused to let her rest. Because rest meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering and remembering. Remembering was the thing she'd spent years trying not to do. But the mark on her wrist wouldn't let her forget. She lifted her arm from the water, watching droplets slide down her skin, pooling in the crescent moon shape that had appeared on her 13th birthday. The elders had called it a blessing at first, a sign from the goddess. They'd gathered around her with reverent eyes and hushed voices, talking about destiny and chosen ones and prophecies older than memory. That lasted exactly 3 days. Until the first shift. She closed her eyes, but the memory came anyway, sharp and unforgiving. The clearing. The full moon hanging overhead like a silver witness. Every young wolf from the pack gathered in a circle, ready to experience their first transformation together. It was supposed to be sacred. Beautiful. The moment when child became adult, when human became whole. She'd felt it building inside her for weeks, the restless energy, the heightened senses, the way her skin felt too tight, like something larger was trying to break free. The other young wolves had whispered about the pain, about the snap and crack of bones reshaping, but they'd all said it was worth it. That on the other side of that pain was power, belonging, purpose. They'd lied. Or maybe they'd just never met someone like her. When the shift finally came, it didn't feel like power. It felt like burning. Silver flame had erupted from her skin before the transformation even started, cold fire that didn't consume, didn't char, but blazed so bright it turned night into day. The other wolves had scattered, terrified, and the elders had shouted words she didn't understand in a language that felt ancient and furious. And when her wolf finally emerged, she wasn't like the others. Smaller, yes. That was expected for an Omega. But it was more than size. Her fur had been pure white, not the grays and browns and blacks of normal wolves. White as snow, as bone, as things that shouldn't exist. And her eyes had burned the same silver as the flames, glowing in a way that made grown wolves back away. One of the elders, a woman named Talia with a face like carved granite, had approached her slowly, carefully. The way someone might approach a wild animal they didn't trust not to bite. What bloodline? Talia had demanded, her voice sharp with something that sounded like fear. Whose daughter is she? Marin's mother, quiet, timid, a woman who'd spent her whole life trying to be invisible, had stepped forward with trembling hands. Just mine, she'd whispered. Just mine, I swear. Her father he was Pack. He died before she was born, but he was Pack. Talia hadn't believed her. None of them had. Because wolves like Marin didn't just appear. The silver flame, the white fur, the eyes that looked like captured moonlight, those were marks of the old bloodlines. The ones that had died out centuries ago. The ones that weren't supposed to exist anymore. The guardian bloodlines. The wolves who'd sworn their lives to protecting the sacred boundaries, who could walk between worlds, who carried magic in their veins instead of just instinct. The ones who'd been hunted to extinction because people feared what they couldn't control. Marin had been sent away that night. Not exiled, not officially, but removed. Placed in a small cottage at the edge of Packlands with her mother, kept apart from the others. For their safety, Talia had said. Until they could understand what she was. That was 8 years ago. They'd never let her back. She'd grown up in the in-between spaces, too dangerous to be embraced, too valuable to be completely cast out. The Pack had used her when it suited them. When the boundary needed reinforcing, when the old magic required blood to sustain it, when there was work too sacred or too risky for normal wolves. But they'd never let her belong. And they'd certainly never let her mate. The gathering 3 nights ago had been a formality. A ritual where young unmated wolves were supposed to find their partners, guided by instinct and fate and the invisible threads that bound compatible souls. She'd felt nothing. No pull. No recognition. No spark. Just the familiar weight of disappointment in 100 pairs of eyes. Defective. That's what they'd called her. An Omega who couldn't even fulfill the one purpose Omegas were supposed to have: bonding, breeding, strengthening pack ties. The council had deliberated for less than an hour before delivering their judgment. Punishment by exposure. 1 night beyond the boundary, to reflect on her failure and pray for the goddess's guidance. It was supposed to be humiliating. It was supposed to break her. Instead, it had brought her to him. A knock on the door made her jump, water sloshing over the side of the tub. I have clothes. Frederick's voice, muffled through the wood. I'm leaving them outside the door. She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat before climbing out, her body protesting every movement. The cuts on her arms had stopped bleeding, at least. The hot water had helped with that. But the bruises along her ribs were already darkening to deep purple, and her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The clothes he'd left were simple, soft gray sweatpants and an oversized black shirt that smelled like cedar and something distinctly him. She pulled them on, trying not to think about the intimacy of wearing his clothes, of being surrounded by his scent. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, he was waiting in the sitting room, standing by the window with his back to her. He'd changed too, traded his soaked clothes for dark jeans and a simple white shirt. His hair was still damp, pushed back from his face. He turned when he heard her, and his eyes did that thing again, that sweeping assessment that felt less like judgment and more like concern. Better, he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He gestured to the couch. Sit. You need to eat. I'm not hungry. I know. He moved to a side table where a tray waited: bread, cheese, fruit, a steaming mug of something that smelled like herbs and honey. Your body is. Eat anyway. She should have argued. Should have reminded him she wasn't some fragile thing that needed tending. But her stomach chose that moment to twist with hunger so fierce it made her dizzy. She sat. He brought the tray to her, then settled into the chair across from her, maintaining careful distance. Watching her with those unsettling amber eyes. She managed 3 bites before the question burning in her chest finally escaped. How long have you been watching me? He didn't flinch. Didn't pretend to misunderstand. 3 years. Since the boundary incident. The boundary incident. That's what they called it. Like it was some minor inconvenience instead of the moment when a section of the sacred protection nearly collapsed and she'd had to spend 2 days bleeding power into the earth to restore it. Why? She set down the bread, her appetite vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Why would the Alpha King care about? Because the boundary recognized you, he said quietly. Because you saved us all and the council tried to cover it up. Because they labeled you unstable and dangerous when you were the only reason we survived. She stared at him, her heart hammering. And because, he continued, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost like confession, I felt it. When you fed the boundary. When your power touched the land. I felt it in my bones, Marin. Like the earth itself was singing. The mark on her wrist burned hotter. I don't know what I am, she whispered. The elders won't tell me. They just look at me like I'm something that should have stayed buried. Frederick leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. You're a guardian. Last of the bloodline we thought died out 200 years ago. He paused. And they're terrified because guardians don't answer to Pax, Marin. They answer to the land itself. The words settled over her like a weight, like a crown she'd never asked for. They're going to kill me, she said. Not a question. A certainty. No, his voice turned to steel. They're not. You can't protect me from the entire council. Watch me. 2 words. Absolute. Unshakable. And for the first time in 8 years, Marin felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. He took her to the shrine at dawn. Marin hadn't slept. Neither had he. They'd sat in that room as night bled into early morning, the silence between them less awkward than it should have been. He'd asked careful questions about her mother, about the shifts that felt wrong, about the times the boundary called to her in dreams. And she'd answered, halting at first, then with increasing honesty. Because something about him made truth feel safer than lies. Now, as pale light filtered through ancient trees, they stood before a place most wolves had forgotten existed. The shrine was older than the pack itself. Older than the territory, maybe older than memory. Stone pillars rose from the earth like broken teeth, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. In the center stood an altar, smooth black rock that seemed to drink in the morning light rather than reflect it. Marin's breath caught. She'd seen this place before. In dreams that felt more like memories. In visions that came when the boundary needed her. How do you know about this? Her voice barely rose above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might wake something that should stay sleeping. Frederick moved toward the altar with the careful respect of someone approaching holy ground. My father brought me here once, right before he died. He traced his fingers over one of the carvings, a wolf wrapped in flame, its eyes 2 perfect circles. He said the old Alpha Kings used to come here to remember what they were really protecting. Not just pack, not just territory, but something older, something sacred. He looked back at her, and the weight in his gaze made her chest tighten. He said one day the Guardian would return. And when she did, everything would change. The mark on Marin's wrist flared hot enough to make her gasp. She clutched her arm, and Frederick was beside her in an instant, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. What is it? The mark, it's never done this before. Not like this. She forced herself to breathe through the burning. It usually only reacts when the boundary needs me, when something's wrong with the protection. Maybe nothing's wrong. His thumb brushed over her wrist, gentle, and the touch sent a different kind of heat through her. Maybe it's reacting because you're finally where you're supposed to be. She looked up at him, and the expression on his face, wonder mixed with something fiercer, something possessive, made her knees weak. Before she could respond, the altar pulsed. Not light, not sound. Just a vibration that seemed to originate from the earth itself, thrumming up through the stone, through her bones, settling in her chest like a second heartbeat. Frederick's hand tightened on her arm. Marin. But she was already moving. Not by choice. Her feet carried her forward like something else was guiding them, pulling her toward the altar with an inevitability that felt both terrifying and right. When her fingers touched the black stone, the world exploded into silver. Images flooded her mind, not memories, but older. Ancient wolves running through forests that no longer existed. A woman with hair like moonlight standing at this very altar, her hands raised as silver flame poured from her palms into the earth. A promise spoken in words Marin didn't know but somehow understood. We guard the spaces between. We hold the line. We are the shield that stands when all others fall. The woman turned, and Marin saw her face. Saw her own eyes staring back at her across centuries. Not ancestor. Not exactly. The same soul. The same power. Reborn. You have always been the guardian. You will always be the guardian. Until the debt is paid. Until the balance is restored. The vision shifted, and suddenly she was seeing through different eyes. Watching as pack after pack forgot their purpose, grew comfortable, grew complacent. Watching as the sacred boundaries weakened because no one remembered to tend them. Watching as the council, her council, made a choice. They'd known what she was. From the moment she'd first shifted, they'd known. And they'd decided she was too dangerous to acknowledge. Too powerful to embrace. So they'd done what frightened people always did. They'd tried to control her by keeping her small. Keeping her scared. Keeping her convinced she was broken instead of sacred. Because a guardian couldn't be commanded. But a broken Omega could. The images shattered and Marin gasped, stumbling back from the altar. Frederick caught her, his arms wrapping around her from behind, holding her steady as her legs threatened to give out. What did you see? His voice was rough, urgent. Marin, talk to me. They knew. The words came out choked. The council. The elders. They've always known what I am. She felt him go rigid behind her. The council was formed 200 years ago, she continued, her voice gaining strength as rage began to burn through the shock. Right after the last guardian died. They convinced the pack that guardians were dangerous. That the old magic was something to fear instead of honor. They rewrote the histories, buried the truths, made sure no one would question their authority. And when you appeared, they couldn't kill me. The boundary wouldn't allow it. The land itself would reject them. She turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. So they did the next best thing. They made me think I was worthless. That my power was a curse. That I was the problem instead of the solution. Frederick's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. Talia. She let it. But the others, they all knew. They all agreed. Marin's hands fisted in his shirt. And 3 nights ago, when they sent me to the boundary as punishment, they weren't trying to discipline me. They were trying to provoke me. His eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising close to the surface. They wanted me to find you. Wanted me to bring you inside. Because the moment I did, the moment I showed interest in protecting you, they could accuse me of choosing an outsider over pack law. Of being compromised. It clicked into place with sickening clarity. They want to remove you, Marin breathed. They've been waiting for an excuse to challenge your authority, and I'm the excuse. Yes. The word came out nearly a growl. But they made one crucial mistake. What? His hands came up to frame her face, his touch impossibly gentle despite the fury radiating from him. They assumed I'd care more about keeping my throne than protecting what's actually worth protecting. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. They assumed wrong. The air between them felt charged, electric. Like the moment before lightning struck. There's a prophecy, Marin whispered, the words rising from somewhere deep, somewhere ancient. I saw it in the vision. When the guardian returns, the false shepherds will fall. When the land chooses its protector, the pretenders will be revealed. And the one who stands beside her will either rule with truth or burn with lies. Frederick's eyes widened fractionally. My father told me that prophecy. He said his father told him, and his father before that, all the way back to the first Alpha King. His voice dropped. He said when the time came, I'd have to choose. Power or purpose. The pack as it is, or the pack as it should be. And what did you choose? He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, and the intimacy of the gesture made her breath catch. I chose you the moment I caught your scent in that storm. His words ghosted across her lips. Before I even knew your name. Before I understood why. I just knew you were what I'd been waiting for. The mark on her wrist blazed bright enough to cast shadows, and the altar behind them hummed with approval. Because this moment, this choice, this man who'd picked truth over tradition, this was what the land had been waiting for. What she'd been waiting for. Not just a protector. Not just an ally. But a partner. An equal. Someone who saw the power in her and wasn't afraid. Someone who'd burn the world down before letting them make her small again. "The council will come for us," she said quietly. "Probably today. They'll want explanations. Accusations. They'll demand you send me back outside. Let them come." Frederick straightened, his arms still around her, and the look on his face was pure predatory satisfaction. "Because I have some demands of my own. Frederick. No more hiding, Marin. No more pretending you're anything less than what you are." His voice rang with absolute certainty. "You're a guardian. The last of an ancient bloodline. And they will acknowledge it, or they will answer to me." She should have been afraid. Should have warned him that standing with her meant standing against centuries of tradition, against wolves who'd kill to protect their secrets. But looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce determination there, the unshakable resolve, she didn't feel afraid. She felt powerful. For the first time in her life, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly who she was supposed to be. The sun crested the horizon, spilling golden light across the shrine, and the ancient stones seemed to sing. A new day, a new truth, and a reckoning 8 years in the making. "They're going to fight us," Marin said. Frederick smiled, and it was a sharp, dangerous thing. "Good. I've been waiting for a real fight." They came at midday. Marin heard them before she saw them, the sound of multiple footsteps crunching through fallen leaves, the rustle of bodies moving through the forest with purpose. She was still at the shrine with Frederick, sitting on one of the fallen pillars while he examined the carvings more closely, trying to decipher meanings that had been lost to time. His head snapped up at the same moment hers did. "Stay behind me," he said, already moving to place himself between her and the approaching wolves. "Frederick, please." He looked back at her, and the plea in his eyes stopped her protest. "I know you can fight. I know you're strong. But let me handle this first." If it goes wrong, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. If it went wrong, she'd have to choose between submission and showing them exactly what kind of power she carried. And once she showed them, there'd be no going back. The trees parted, and they emerged, 8 members of the council, led by Talia. The elder moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged, her silver hair braided tight against her skull, her face a mask of righteous authority. Behind her came the others, Garrick, the head enforcer, built like a mountain with scars that told stories of violence. Stellan, the record keeper, whose eyes were always watching, always judging. Evander, the ritual master, draped in ceremonial furs despite the warming day. And others. Wolves whose names Marin knew but whose faces had always looked at her with varying degrees of disgust or pity. None of them looked surprised to find her here. They'd been expecting this. Alpha King. Talia's voice carried the particular tone of someone who believed their position gave them authority over everyone, including the man they were supposed to serve. "We've been searching for you since dawn. Imagine our concern when we discovered you'd left the celebration early. Without escort. Without explanation." Frederick's stance didn't change, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, but every line of his body screaming predator. "I don't require permission to move through my own territory, Talia." "Of course not." Her smile was thin, cold. But when the Alpha King disappears in the middle of a storm, when he's found the next morning with, her gaze slid past him to Marin, and the contempt in it was like a physical blow. With a wolf who is undergoing sacred punishment, well, questions arise. "The only question," Frederick said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is why you thought it acceptable to leave a member of this pack outside the boundary during the worst storm we've seen in months." She was being disciplined. She was being killed. The words cracked like a whip. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." Garrick stepped forward, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "You overstep, Alpha. The Council has governed discipline in this pack for 2 centuries. The Omega failed her duty at the gathering. Punishment was required." Her duty. Frederick's laugh was bitter. "And what duty is that, exactly? To magically feel attraction to wolves who've spent her entire life treating her like contamination? To force a bond that clearly wasn't meant to exist? The bond exists for all wolves, Evander interjected, his voice carrying the sing-song quality of ritual speech. Unless the wolf is defective. The word hung in the air like poison. Maren felt her wolf surge, felt the silver flame wanting to rise, wanting to show them exactly how defective she was. Frederick's hand clenched at his side, but his voice remained steady. She's not defective. She's a guardian. The silence that followed was absolute. Talia's face went carefully blank. I'm sorry, what did you say? You heard me. Frederick gestured to the shrine around them, to the ancient stones and sacred carvings. This place exists because of wolves like Maren. Wolves who protected our borders, who maintain the magic that keeps us safe. And you know it. The guardian bloodlines died out. Stop. Lying. Each word was bitten off, sharp as teeth. You've known what she was since her first shift. You've known and you've spent 8 years trying to suppress it, trying to break her, because a guardian doesn't answer to a council. A guardian answers to the land itself. Talia's composure cracked, just slightly. Her eyes narrowed. You've been at the shrine. You've touched the altar. She looked at Maren with something close to fear. She showed you. The altar showed me, Maren said, finding her voice. Finding her courage. It showed me everything. How the council was formed after the last guardian died. How you've been rewriting history, burying truths, making sure no one remembered what we used to be. We did what was necessary, Stellan spoke up, his record-keeper's voice precise. The guardian bloodlines were too powerful, too unpredictable. They couldn't be controlled, couldn't be reasoned with. They put their loyalty to abstract concepts over the safety of the pack. They put their loyalty to the land, Frederick corrected. To the magic that actually keeps us alive. Not to politicians wearing the skin of leaders. Garrick's hand moved to his knife. Be very careful, Alpha. Those words sound dangerously close to treason. Treason. Frederick's smile was sharp enough to cut. That's rich, coming from a council that's been systematically undermining pack law for generations. We are pack law, Talia snapped, her composure shattering completely. We've guided this pack through wars, through plagues, through challenges you can't even imagine. We've kept order when everything else fell apart. And you've kept it by suppressing the one thing that could actually protect us. Frederick took a step forward, and despite being outnumbered, despite facing wolves twice his age with decades more experience, he looked like the most dangerous thing in the clearing. The boundary is weakening. It has been for years. You know it. I know it. And the only reason we haven't collapsed already is because of her. He pointed back at Maren, and 8 pairs of eyes followed the gesture. Every time there's been a breach, every time something's tried to cross from the other side, who do you send? Frederick's voice rang out. Who bleeds for you? Who pours her power into ground you won't even let her walk on freely? Maren's throat tightened. She hadn't realized he knew. Hadn't thought anyone paid attention to the times she was summoned in the dead of night, brought to weak points in the boundary, and told to fix what she didn't break. The Omega serves the pack, Talia said coldly. As all Omegas do. She's not an Omega. She's a guardian. And she doesn't serve you. Frederick's eyes flashed gold. She serves something far greater than your politics. And you've decided this, have you? Evander's voice dripped with disdain. One night with the girl and suddenly you're an expert on ancient bloodlines? The implication in his tone, the suggestion of what might have happened during that night, made Maren's face burn with humiliation and rage. But before she could speak, before she could defend herself, Frederick moved. He was across the distance and in Evander's face before the older wolf could even blink, moving with speed that reminded everyone present exactly why he was Alpha. Say that again, Frederick said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please. I'd love an excuse. Evander's confidence evaporated. He stumbled back, hands raised. I meant no. Yes, you did. Frederick didn't follow, didn't press the advantage. Just stood there, radiating controlled violence. You meant to imply something inappropriate about both of us. To make her seem like she used her body to manipulate me. To make me seem weak-minded enough to be manipulated. He looked around at the council, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Let me be absolutely clear. Marin is under my protection. She will no longer be treated as lesser. She will no longer be called defective or used as a convenient tool when the boundary needs tending. She is a guardian, and she will be acknowledged as such. You can't demand Talia started. I'm not demanding. I'm declaring. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. As Alpha King, I have the right to elevate wolves whose service has been undervalued. Marin has protected this pack for 8 years with no recognition, no respect, and no compensation. That ends now. Garrick's knife came free of its sheath. And if the council disagrees, the threat was clear. Challenge. Possibly violence. Marin's wolf snarled, and she felt the silver flame rising, felt her power reaching for the surface. If Garrick moved toward Frederick, if any of them tried to hurt him, then the council can present their case before the full pack, Frederick said calmly. Call an assembly. Let every wolf hear what you've done. Let them decide if they want to be led by a council that spent 2 centuries lying to them. Talia's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. Try me. The standoff stretched, tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, Stellan spoke, his voice carefully measured. An assembly would be unwise. It would divide the pack. Create chaos. Then accept my decision, Frederick said. Acknowledge what she is. Let her live as she should have been allowed to live all along. And if we do? Talia's eyes were calculating now. What then? She stays here? In your residence? In your bed? The crude suggestion made Marin flinch, but Frederick just smiled. Where she stays is her choice. Not yours. Not mine. He glanced back at her, and the look in his eyes was steady, reassuring. She's free to go wherever she pleases. Do whatever she pleases. She owes none of us anything. Something in Marin's chest cracked open. Freedom. He was offering her freedom. Talia must have sensed the shift because her expression hardened. Very well. We'll consider your request. But until a formal decision is made, the Omega, she caught herself. Marin. She cannot be seen publicly with you. The pack will talk. Rumors will spread. Let them talk. Frederick turned his back on the council, a deliberate insult, a statement of dismissal. We're done here. You have until sunset to make your decision. After that, I call the assembly. He walked back to Marin, offered his hand. She took it, and together they left the council standing in the shrine, surrounded by stones that remembered when guardians were revered instead of feared. They didn't speak until they were well away from the clearing, until the sounds of angry muttering had faded behind them. Then Marin stopped, pulling her hand from his. You shouldn't have done that. He turned, eyebrows raised. Protected you? Threatened them. Challenged the entire council. Put your position at risk. She wrapped her arms around herself. Frederick, they'll retaliate. They'll find a way to. To what? Remove me? He stepped closer. Let them try. You don't understand. They've been planning this for years. Waiting for you to make a mistake big enough to justify a challenge. And I'm that mistake. You're not a mistake. His hands came to rest on her shoulders. You're the best thing that's happened to this pack in 200 years. Even if they're too blind to see it. They're going to make you choose, she whispered. The crown or me? Pack or guardian? They'll force you into a position where you have to. I already chose. The words stopped her cold. He leaned down, his forehead touching hers, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. I chose the moment I picked you up in that storm. The moment I brought you inside. The moment I decided your life was worth more than their approval. His breath ghosted across her lips. They can take the crown. They can challenge me, exile me, whatever they want. But they can't make me abandon you. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. Why? The question broke on a sob. Why would you risk everything for someone like me? His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. Because someone like you is worth everything. And then, soft as a promise, he kissed her. It wasn't desperate or demanding, just gentle, reverent, like he was sealing a vow. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Understood, She nodded, not trusting her voice. Because whatever came next was going to be brutal. The council would never accept this. And when they struck, they'd strike hard. The sun was setting when they reached the place Frederick called his sanctuary. It wasn't a building. Wasn't even close to pack lands. Just a small clearing deep in the forest, where an old stone foundation marked where something, a house, maybe, or a shrine, had stood generations ago. Moss covered the broken walls, and wildflowers pushed through the cracks, reclaiming what time had tried to erase. A stream ran along one edge, its gentle murmur the only sound besides their footsteps and the whisper of wind through leaves. "I come here when the pack gets too loud," Frederick said, settling onto one of the larger stones. "When I need to remember who I am without the crown." Marin stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. She could feel the tension still coiled in her shoulders, the aftermath of the confrontation vibrating through her bones. "They're going to reject your decision," she said quietly. "You know that. Probably. And then we deal with it." He patted the stone beside him. "Sit. Please. You're making me nervous standing there like you're about to bolt." She wasn't sure if she was about to bolt or not. Everything felt too big, too fast, too impossible. Yesterday she'd been nobody. A mistake the pack tolerated out of necessity. Today she was a guardian, the subject of ancient prophecies, and somehow tangled up with an alpha king who'd just set fire to his own authority for her sake. But she sat. The stone was still warm from the day's heat, and when she settled beside him, their shoulders almost touched. Almost. Close enough to feel his warmth, but not quite touching. "Tell me something," Frederick said, his eyes on the darkening sky. "If you could go anywhere right now, anywhere in the world, no pack, no council, no responsibilities, where would you go?" The question caught her off guard. "I've never thought about it," she admitted. "I've never been allowed to think about it. Think about it now." She closed her eyes, letting herself imagine. Letting herself want something impossible. "The ocean," she said finally. "I've never seen it. But sometimes, when I'm bleeding power into the boundary, when I'm connected to the earth that deeply, I can feel it. The pull of water that vast. It calls to me the same way the land does." When she opened her eyes, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just, you talk about the boundary like it's alive. Like it has feelings. Because it does." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "Everything does, if you listen close enough. The earth, the trees, the water. They all have their own kind of consciousness. Their own kind of voice. And you can hear them. I've always been able to hear them. Even before I shifted." She rested her chin on her knees. "My mother used to say I was too sensitive. That I felt things too deeply. She was probably right. Sensitivity isn't weakness. The pack seems to think differently." Frederick was quiet for a moment, then shifted so he was facing her more directly. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone." She nodded. "I hate being Alpha King." The words came out rough, like they'd been locked away too long. "Not the responsibility, I don't mind that. But the performance of it. The constant need to be strong, untouchable, perfect. The way everyone watches me like they're waiting for me to fail." He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost vulnerable. "My father, he loved being alpha. Thrived on it. The power, the respect, the way everyone deferred to him. I used to watch him and think, how do you carry all of that and not collapse under the weight? What did he say when you asked him?" "I never asked." His laugh was bitter. "I was too afraid he'd be disappointed that I even had doubts." Marin understood that fear. Had lived with its twin her entire life. "He died when I was 19, Frederick continued. Heart attack. Just gone. And suddenly I was alpha, and everyone expected me to be just like him. Strong. Certain. Unshakable." He looked at her. "But I'm not him, Marin. I never have been. Is that why you've been watching me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Because I'm the only other wolf who doesn't fit the mold?" "Maybe," he considered. "Or maybe because when I saw you at the boundary that first time, when you were pouring yourself into the earth, keeping us all safe while everyone else celebrated inside, I recognized something. What? Someone else who was tired of pretending. The honesty in his voice made her throat tight. She reached out, tentative, and touched his hand where it rested on the stone between them. His fingers immediately curled around hers, warm and solid. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be what they say I am. A guardian. Someone important. Someone worth, she couldn't finish. Worth protecting. Worth fighting for. Worth loving. You don't have to know, Frederick said. Not yet. You just have to be willing to try. And if I fail, then we fail together. He squeezed her hand. But I don't think you will. You don't know that. No. But I know you. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the touch sending warmth spiraling up her arm. I know you've survived 8 years of cruelty and isolation without breaking. I know you've protected wolves who wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire. I know you have more strength in your smallest finger than most wolves have in their entire bodies. That's not strength. That's just surviving? Yes, it is. He lifted their joined hands, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. And surviving is the hardest, bravest thing anyone can do. Marin's eyes burned. She'd spent so long believing she was weak, broken, defective, less than, that hearing someone call her brave felt like a language she didn't speak. The council is going to use me against you, she said, trying to pull herself back from the edge of tears. They'll say you're compromised. That you've chosen a guardian over your pack. Let them. Frederick. No. Listen to me. He turned fully toward her, using his free hand to tilt her face up so she had to meet his eyes. I spent 3 years watching you from a distance. 3 years telling myself I was just being vigilant, just making sure the council wasn't doing something worse than they already had. 3 years lying to myself about why I couldn't stop thinking about you. His voice dropped, roughened with emotion. And then I found you in that storm, bleeding and freezing and still trying to protect the very wolves who'd thrown you away. And I realized I'm done lying. I'm done pretending. I'm done choosing duty over what actually matters. And what matters? Her voice came out barely a whisper. You. Simple. Absolute. You matter, Marin. Not because of what you can do for the pack. Not because you're a guardian or because of some prophecy. But because you're you. And you deserve to be seen. Protected. Cherished. A tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb, then leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Her cheek. The corner of her mouth. I know it's fast, he murmured against her skin. I know we barely know each other. But wolves mate for life, and sometimes you just know. Her breath caught. Know what? He pulled back just enough to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes stole whatever breath she had left. Recognition. Belonging. The kind of bone-deep certainty that came from somewhere beyond logic. That I'd burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you again. His hand cupped her face. That if choosing you means losing everything else, I'd still choose you. Every time. That's insane, she whispered, but her hand came up to cover his, holding it against her cheek. Maybe. His smile was soft, almost boyish. But you make me want to be insane. You make me want to stop being the perfect alpha and start being the wolf who fights for what he believes in. And what do you believe in? Right now? He leaned in, his lips barely brushing hers. I believe in this. And then he was kissing her properly, not gentle this time, but hungry. Desperate. Like he was trying to pour every emotion he couldn't articulate into the press of his mouth against hers. Marin responded without thinking, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss tasted like possibility and danger, and the kind of reckless hope she'd thought died in her years ago. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Frederick rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he said. I'm not asking for anything except your company. But I don't want to let you out of my sight. Not when the council is still deciding how to respond. She should have said no. Should have insisted on putting distance between them, on not making this worse than it already was. Instead, she found herself nodding. Okay. Relief flooded his expression. Okay. They sat there as full dark fell, hands intertwined, shoulders pressed together, listening to the stream and the night sounds of the forest. And for the first time in her life, Marin felt something she'd never quite managed before. Safe. Not because she was hidden. Not because she was small enough to be overlooked. But because someone saw all of her, the power, the fear, the broken pieces, and the fierce strength, and chose to stand beside her anyway. Whatever came next, whatever the council decided, whatever battles they'd have to fight, they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. The assembly was called at dawn. Marin woke to the sound of drums, the old kind, carved from hollow logs, beaten with fists wrapped in leather. The rhythm was ancient, ceremonial, meant to summon every wolf in the territory to the gathering grounds. It meant the council had made their decision. She found Frederick already awake, standing at the window of his residence, his jaw tight as he watched wolves emerge from their homes and begin the trek toward the center of Pack lands. "They're not waiting until sunset," she said, pulling his shirt, the one she'd borrowed to sleep in, tighter around herself. No, his voice was flat, empty in a way that made her stomach clench. "They're striking while they think I'm unprepared. Are you?" He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Not the gentle protector from last night. Not even the fierce defender from the shrine. This was the Alpha King. Cold. Calculating. Dangerous. "Get dressed," he said. "Wear something that shows your wrist." The mark. He wanted them to see the mark. She changed quickly, pulling on clothes he'd found for her, simple dark pants and a sleeveless top that left her arms bare. When she emerged, he was waiting by the door, dressed in black from head to toe, looking every inch the ruler he was supposed to be. He took her hand without a word, and together they walked toward the drums. The gathering grounds were already packed. Hundreds of wolves, maybe more, stood in concentric circles around a raised platform where the council waited. Marin could feel every eye on them as they approached, could hear the whispers rising like a wave. Is that her? The Omega who failed. With the Alpha King all night. Heard she forced a bond. "Ignore them," Frederick murmured, his grip on her hand tightening. "Look at me. Not them. Just me." She focused on his profile, on the strong line of his jaw, on the way he held himself like he owned the very ground beneath their feet. They climbed the platform steps, and the council parted to let them through. Talia stood at the center, flanked by Garrick and Evander, with the others arranged behind them like a wall of judgment. The drums stopped. Silence crashed over the gathering like a physical thing. Talia stepped forward, her voice carrying across the assembled wolves with practiced ease. "We're gathered to address a matter of great importance," she began. "A matter that affects the very foundation of our pack, our laws, our future." Marin's heart hammered against her ribs. 3 nights ago, an Omega failed to attract a mate at the sacred gathering. As is our tradition, she was given a night beyond the boundary to reflect on her inadequacy, to pray for the goddess's guidance. The word stung, but Marin forced herself to remain still, expressionless. However, Talia continued, her gaze sliding to Frederick. "Our Alpha King chose to interfere with this sacred punishment. He brought the Omega inside, gave her shelter, allowed her to remain in his private residence." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. And yesterday, Talia's voice sharpened. When the council attempted to question this decision, the Alpha King made claims. Extraordinary claims. He declared that this Omega, this wolf who has been nothing but a burden and a danger to our pack, is actually a guardian. One of the ancient bloodline we all know died out 2 centuries ago. She let that sink in, let the skepticism and confusion build. Furthermore, he threatened to call this very assembly if we did not accept his declaration without question. So here we are. Talia spread her hands. Let the pack decide. Is our Alpha King fit to lead? Or has he been compromised by misplaced sympathy for a wolf who should never have been allowed to survive her first shift? The crowd erupted. Shouts of support for the council. Angry demands for explanation. confusion and fear tangling together into chaos. Frederick remained perfectly still beside Marin, but she could feel the tension radiating from him in waves. Finally, he stepped forward, and his presence alone was enough to silence the gathering. "The council is correct about one thing," he said, his voice carrying despite not being raised. "I did bring Marin inside. I did give her shelter. And I would do it again." He turned, gesturing for Marin to step forward. She did, forcing her legs to move despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "Show them," Frederick said quietly. She lifted her wrist, and the mark blazed silver in the early morning light, bright enough that wolves in the back rows could see it, bright enough that there was no mistaking what it was. Gasps echoed through the crowd. "The crescent and flame," someone whispered. "The Guardian's mark. It's a trick. It can't be real. The Guardians are gone." "They're not gone," Frederick said, his voice cutting through the noise. "One survived. She's been here, hidden among us, for 22 years. And you've all used her." He pointed to the boundary, visible as a faint shimmer in the distance. "Every time there's been a breach, every time something's tried to cross from the other side, who fixed it? Every time the protection weakened, who bled to strengthen it? Every time the sacred ground needed tending, who did you send?" Silence fell again, but this time it was uncomfortable. "Guilty. You sent Marin," Frederick continued. "You sent the wolf you called defective, the one you kept at the edges, the one you refused to acknowledge. Because deep down, you knew what she was. You just didn't want to admit it." Talia's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "Even if the mark is genuine, even if she carries guardian blood, that doesn't change the fact that she's unstable. Dangerous. Her first shift nearly killed 3 wolves. Her power is uncontrolled, unpredictable. Her power is uncontrolled because you never trained her," Frederick shot back. "You kept her isolated, afraid, convinced she was broken. You did everything possible to keep her from understanding what she is. We did what was necessary to protect the pack. You did what was necessary to protect yourselves." His voice turned to ice. "Because a guardian doesn't answer to a council. And that terrified you." Garrick stepped forward, his hand on his knife again. "You accuse us of acting in self-interest while you defend a wolf you've bedded. Who's really compromised here, Alpha?" The implication, crude and cruel, made Marin's face burn. But Frederick just smiled. That sharp, dangerous smile. "I haven't bedded anyone, Garrick. Though I appreciate you making my point for me." He looked out at the crowd. "This is what they do. When they can't attack the truth, they attack character. When they can't defend their actions, they deflect. We have defended this pack for 200 years," Talia started. "By lying to them," Frederick interrupted. "By rewriting histories, burying truths, making sure no one questioned your authority." He turned to Stellan. "You're the record keeper. Tell them. Tell them what you found in the old archives. The ones you thought I didn't know about." Stellan's face went white. "Tell them," Frederick pressed, "about the entries that detail how the council systematically hunted the Guardian bloodlines. How they called it protecting the pack, while actually eliminating anyone who could challenge their power. Those records are sealed," Stellan stammered. "We're sealed." Frederick's smile turned triumphant. "I unsealed them. 3 years ago, when I started investigating why our boundary was failing. Want to know what I found?" The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "I found records of guardians being exiled, executed, or driven to suicide. I found accounts of councils across multiple territories working together to eliminate wolves with too much power, too much connection to the old magic. I found proof that the very wolves who claim to protect us have been our greatest threat." Talia's composure finally cracked. "You self-righteous fool. You have no idea what those guardians were capable of. The destruction they could cause. The chaos. The truth, you mean." Frederick's voice was soft now. "Deadly. The chaos of wolves who couldn't be controlled. Who might have actually held councils accountable." He turned back to the crowd. "Marin is the last guardian. The only one who survived your ancestors' purge. And for 8 years, You've used her to maintain the very protection your council nearly destroyed. She's bled for you, suffered for you, protected you while you spat on her. His eyes swept across the gathered wolves. So yes, I brought her inside. I gave her shelter. I acknowledged what she is. And I will continue to protect her because unlike this council, I actually value the wolves who sacrifice for this pack. For a moment, Marin thought they'd won. Thought the truth would be enough. Then Evander stepped forward, and his voice rang out with ritual certainty. The prophecy speaks of the Guardian's return, but it also warns us. He raised his hands, and his voice took on that sing-song quality. When the Guardian wakes, the land will choose. When the Guardian rises, destruction follows. She will save us or damn us, and the choice is not hers to make. He pointed at Marin, and his finger trembled with genuine fear. Her power will destroy us. It's already beginning. The storms have been worse since she started feeding the boundary. The earthquakes, the floods, they follow her power. She's not protecting us. She's killing us slowly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Marin felt the ground drop out from under her. No, that wasn't. The natural disasters have nothing to do with her, Frederick said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Don't they? Talia stepped forward, sensing weakness. Every time she bleeds power into the boundary, the earth reacts. Every time she touches the sacred ground, something breaks. She's not a guardian, Frederick. She's a curse. And you're too blinded by whatever you feel for her to see it. That's not true, Marin started, but her voice came out small, uncertain. Because what if it was true? What if her power, raw and uncontrolled like they said, was causing more harm than good? What if she was the destruction the prophecy warned about? The crowd was turning. She could feel it. The fear spreading like wildfire. She needs to be contained, someone shouted. Exiled. Executed before she kills us all. No, Frederick's voice cut through the rising panic. You will not touch her. Then you choose her over your pack, Talia said quietly, triumphantly. You choose one wolf, one dangerous, unstable wolf over hundreds. And that Alpha King is why you are unfit to lead. Garrick's knife came free of its sheath, and behind him, a dozen more enforcers drew their weapons. The challenge was clear. Stand down or fight. Frederick's wolf surged forward, gold bleeding into his eyes. His hands clenched into fists. But he was one wolf. Against dozens. And they knew it. Marin felt her own power rising, felt the silver flame wanting to surface, wanting to protect him the way he'd protected her. But if she used it, if she showed them the full extent of what she could do, she'd prove Evander right. She'd prove she was the destruction they feared. Frederick looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the choice he was making. Saw him preparing to fight, to die if necessary, rather than let them take her. And she couldn't let him do that. Couldn't let him throw everything away for a wolf who might actually be the curse they claimed. So she did the only thing she could. She ran. Leaped off the platform and into the crowd, using speed she didn't know she had. Wolves scattered, some trying to grab her, but she was faster. Stronger than they expected. She heard Frederick roar her name, heard the sound of a fight breaking out behind her. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if she stayed, he'd die protecting her. And if he died, the prophecy would be right. She would have destroyed everything. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed for mercy. Ran until the sounds of the assembly faded into nothing but wind and her own ragged breathing. Ran until she reached the one place that had always called to her, even when she'd tried to ignore it. The boundary. Marin collapsed at the edge of the sacred line, her hands sinking into earth that hummed with recognition. The mark on her wrist blazed so hot it should have burned, but instead it felt right. Like coming home after being lost for too long. Behind her, she could hear them coming. The council's enforcers, tracking her scent through the forest. They'd find her soon. Would drag her back. Would execute her in front of the pack to prove she was the threat they claimed. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was destruction wrapped in skin. Maybe the world would be better. No, The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. From the earth beneath her hands, from the air in her lungs, from the ancient magic that had been waiting dormant for someone to finally hear it. You are not destruction. You are balance. You are the shield and the sword. You are what they forgot how to be. Marin's breath hitched. I don't know how. You have always known. You've simply been taught not to trust yourself. The ground beneath her hands began to glow. Not silver this time, but gold. Ancient and pure and older than any living memory. They are coming. The ones who would silence you. Who would bury the truth again? Frederick, her voice broke on his name. They'll kill him if I don't. He fights for you still. Even now, outnumbered and bleeding, he refuses to yield. Rage ignited in her chest. White-hot and absolute. They were hurting him. Because of her. Because he dared to see her as something more than a mistake. The silver flame erupted from her skin, but this time it didn't feel uncontrolled. This time it felt like an extension of herself. Like breathing. The boundary responded, its ancient magic rising to meet hers. Light spiraled up from the sacred line, weaving through the trees, painting the forest in shades of silver and gold. And Marin understood. Finally understood what the Guardians had been. What she was meant to be. Not just a protector of physical borders, but a bridge between worlds. Between the pack and the land. Between what was and what could be. She rose to her feet as the enforcers burst into the clearing. Garrick led them, his knife still wet with blood that could only be Frederick's. Behind him, 6 more wolves, all armed, all ready to kill. Stand down, Omega, Garrick commanded. The council has sentenced you to death for crimes against the pack. You can die with dignity or die fighting. Your choice. Marin looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what she'd always seen in the council's eyes. Fear. They were terrified of her. Of what she represented. Of the power they couldn't contain or control. I am not an Omega, she said quietly. I never was. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. Resonated. Like the earth itself was speaking through her. I am Marin. Last guardian of the sacred boundary. Daughter of the old bloodlines. And I am done being your victim. The silver flame exploded outward. Not to attack. Not to destroy. But to reveal. Light poured from her in waves, washing over the enforcers, over the trees, over the boundary itself. And everywhere it touched, truth surfaced. The ground beneath the clearing cracked, and from the fissures rose images made of light and memory. Ancient wolves standing where she stood now. Guardians performing rituals that kept the balance, that protected not just wolves, but the land itself. And then darker images. Council members, ancestors of the ones who ruled now, plotting in secret. Making decisions. Hunting guardian bloodlines like prey. One image showed a young guardian, barely older than Marin, being surrounded by wolves bearing the council's mark. Showed her pleading for mercy. Showed them driving a blade through her heart while she screamed. No, Garrick said, stumbling back. That's not real. You're making it up. I'm not making anything up. Marin's voice was steady now. Strong. The land remembers. The boundary remembers. Every drop of guardian blood spilled to keep your secrets, it all lives in the earth. And it's been waiting for someone to finally listen. More images rose. Dozens of them. Guardians executed, exiled, driven mad by isolation and fear. All because they'd been too powerful. Too connected to something older than pack law. Too much of a threat to wolves who wanted control more than truth. You murdered them, Marin said, and now her voice did rise. Did fill the clearing with the weight of centuries of injustice. You and your ancestors. You systematically destroyed an entire bloodline because you were afraid. Because you wanted power without accountability. Because you couldn't stand the idea of wolves who answered to something greater than your authority. They were dangerous. One of the enforcers tried. They were protectors. Marin's power flared and the ground shook. Not violently, but enough to remind every wolf present that she could tear the earth apart if she chose. They died keeping you safe from threats you never even saw. And you repaid them with genocide. The mark on her wrist burned brighter, And suddenly she could feel it, the boundary stretching for miles in every direction. Could feel every weak point, every place where something dark pressed against the protection, trying to break through. Could feel how close they all were to complete collapse. The boundary is failing, she said. Not because of me. Because of you. Because for 200 years, there's been no one to properly maintain it. No one with the blood, the power, the connection it needs. She looked at Garrick, at the other enforcers, and saw their certainty cracking. I've been holding it together with scraps. With whatever power I could bleed into the earth when you summoned me in the middle of the night. But it's not enough. It's never been enough. Then fix it, Garrick demanded. If you're really a guardian, if you're really what you claim, prove it. Fix the boundary. I can't. The admission seemed to surprise them. Because fixing it requires more than just power, Marin continued. It requires sacrifice, understanding, a willingness to give everything to something greater than yourself. She turned, facing the boundary, feeling its ancient hunger. It requires a guardian who's free, not one who's been beaten and broken and convinced she's worthless. Not one who's been used and discarded and told she should be grateful for scraps. She looked back at them. It requires someone who knows her worth, who understands her purpose, who isn't afraid to be what she was born to be. The silver flame rose higher, spiraling into the sky like a beacon. And in the distance, she heard it. Howls. Not from the enforcers, but from the assembly grounds. The pack was coming. All of them. Drawn by the light, by the power, by something primal that told them to witness what was happening. They poured into the clearing hundreds of wolves, including the council, including Frederick. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his shirt torn, his face bruised. But he was alive. And when his eyes found hers, the relief in them was staggering. Talia pushed to the front, her face a mask of fury. What have you done? Shown them the truth, Marin said simply. Something you should have done centuries ago. You've doomed us all. No, Frederick's voice cut through, rough and tired but unwavering. She's given us a chance. Maybe the only one we'll get. He moved toward Marin, and the crowd parted for him. When he reached her, his hand found hers, their fingers interlacing like they'd done it 1,000 times. Together, he asked quietly. She nodded. Together. They turned to face the boundary, and Marin reached for her power. Not the scraps she'd been working with. Not the careful, controlled trickle she'd learned to manage. All of it. The silver flame exploded from both of them, from her mark, from Frederick's eyes, from their joined hands. Because he was touching her, connected to her, and the land recognized him too. Recognized an alpha who'd chosen truth over tradition. The boundary blazed to life. Light shot along the sacred line in both directions, bright enough to hurt, strong enough to shake the ground. Every weak point sealed. Every crack repaired. Every dark thing pressing against the protection screamed and recoiled, unable to withstand the pure force of ancient magic finally, fully awakened. The earth sang, and Marin felt it, felt the land accepting her, claiming her, recognizing her not as a curse, but as exactly what she was supposed to be. A guardian. A bridge. A balance. When the light finally faded, the boundary stood stronger than it had in centuries. Unbreakable. Radiant. Perfect. And Marin stood at its heart, still holding Frederick's hand, still glowing with residual power. The pack stared in absolute silence. Then, slowly, wolves began to kneel. Not to the council. To her. No, Marin's voice came out stronger than she felt. Don't kneel to me. I'm not your ruler. Then what are you? Someone called out. She looked at Frederick, who smiled despite his injuries. I'm the guardian, she said, turning back to the crowd. And I'm free. Free to choose. Free to live as I was meant to. Free to protect you, not because I have to, but because I choose to. Her eyes found Talia. The council's power ends today. Not because I'm taking it, but because you no longer have the right to speak for wolves you've lied to for generations. You can't, Talia started. I can. Marin's voice was absolute. The land has spoken. The boundary has chosen. And you, Talia, are done. The ancient magic hummed in agreement. And somewhere in the distance, something that sounded like thunder rolled across the sky. Not a storm, a promise. Change had come. And nothing would ever be the same. The council was removed within the hour. Not executed. Marin wouldn't allow that, despite Frederick's arguments that they deserved far worse than exile. But exile was what they got, stripped of their authority, their titles, their place within the pack. Sent beyond the boundary with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the weight of their crimes. Talia had looked back once as she crossed the sacred line. Looked at Marin with something that might have been regret or might have been hatred. It was hard to tell. Marin didn't care which it was. The elder was someone else's problem now. 3 days had passed since the assembly. 3 days of reorganizing pack structure, of listening to wolves who'd been silenced for years finally speak their truths, of beginning the long, difficult work of undoing 2 centuries of lies. 3 days of discovering what it meant to be free. Now, as sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, Marin stood at the boundary again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Frederick stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, his presence steady as the earth beneath their feet. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. She considered. The boundary hummed contentedly, no longer desperate for attention, no longer crying out for power it couldn't sustain. The land felt balanced. Whole. Like something that had been broken for far too long was finally healing. Strange, she admitted. Good strange. But strange. Good strange is better than bad strange. Wise words from the Alpha King. Former Alpha King, he corrected. She turned to look at him, eyebrows raised. "You're really going through with it?" "I told them this morning. The pack needs to choose their next leader. Someone who actually wants the job." He smiled. "I'm much better suited to being a guardian's mate. If she'll have me." The word mate sent warmth spiraling through her chest. "That's a very big assumption," she said, trying to sound stern and failing completely. "Is it?" He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "Because I seem to remember a prophecy about the one who stands beside the guardian. Something about ruling with truth or burning with lies. You remember that, do you?" "I remember everything you've ever said to me." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Every word. Every confession. Every moment. That's a lot of pressure. Good thing I've never been afraid of pressure." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "So, what do you say, Marin? Want to try this? Build something new together? No councils, no lies, just us." She pretended to think about it, even though her answer had been yes since the moment he'd carried her out of that storm. "I suppose I could give you a chance," she said. "As long as you understand that being a guardian's mate means standing beside the most powerful, beautiful, fierce wolf I've ever met while she rebuilds the world." He grinned. "Yeah, I think I can handle that." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, the sky had deepened to indigo, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "What do you think happens next?" Frederick asked, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on top of her head. "I don't know," Marin admitted. "The boundary is strong, but there's still so much I don't understand. So much the council destroyed that we'll never get back. Then we'll learn together. Figure it out as we go. And if I make mistakes? If I'm not, you'll make mistakes," he interrupted gently. "We both will. But we'll make them honestly. And we'll face the consequences together. That's all anyone can ask." She leaned into him, breathing in cedar and safety and home. "The pack still doesn't trust me," she said quietly. "Some of them look at me like I'm going to destroy them. Some of them will always be afraid. Fear doesn't disappear overnight." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But more of them are starting to see what I saw. A wolf who's stronger than she knows, braver than she believes, and worthy of so much more than she was given." "You're biased." "Absolutely." His voice held a smile. "Hopelessly, completely biased. And I'm not apologizing for it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars multiply, feeling the boundary pulse with contentment beneath their feet. Finally, Marin spoke, her voice soft but certain. I'm going to find them. Find who? Other guardians. If they exist. If any survived. She looked up at him. The land, it whispers sometimes. About places where the old magic still lives. Where wolves like me might be hiding. Might be waiting for someone to tell them it's safe to come home. Frederick's expression turned thoughtful. That could be dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous. Fair point. He considered. Then we'll find them together. You, me, and whoever's brave enough to join us. You'd leave the territory? Leave the pack. The pack will be fine without me. Better, probably. They need someone who wants to lead, not someone who's been forced into it. He turned her to face him fully. But you, Marin, you're my pack now. You're my home. Wherever you go, that's where I belong. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, made her eyes burn with unshed tears. What did I do to deserve you? She whispered. You survived, he said simply. You stayed kind when the world was cruel. You protected wolves who never protected you. You refused to let them break you, even when breaking would have been easier. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. You were brave enough to keep living when they wanted you to disappear. That's what you did to deserve me. You were you. And that's more than enough. The tears fell then, but they weren't sad. They were relief. Release. The weight of 8 years of believing she was worthless finally lifting. I love you, she said. The words felt new and terrifying and perfect. I know it's fast. I know we barely. I love you too. He smiled against her lips. Have since the moment I saw you guarding that boundary in a storm. Probably before that. Probably from the first time I felt your power singing through the earth. That's impossible. So is a guardian who survived extinction. So is an alpha king who'd rather be a mate than a ruler. So is all of this. He gestured to the boundary, to the stars, to the impossible reality they'd built together. Might as well add impossible love to the list. She laughed, breathless and bright, and kissed him again. When they finally pulled apart, the moon had risen full and silver and watching. So what now? She asked. Now. Frederick's grin was pure mischief. Now we live. We explore. We find other guardians. We build something better than what came before. That's a lot of responsibility. Good thing you're not carrying it alone anymore. And that, Marin thought, made all the difference. She wasn't alone. Wasn't broken. Wasn't a curse or a mistake or any of the things they'd told her she was. She was a guardian. A survivor. A wolf who'd learned to turn pain into power, isolation into strength, fear into fierce, unbreakable love. She was Marin. And her story was just beginning. The boundary hummed its approval as they walked back toward the pack grounds, hands intertwined, shoulders brushing, two wolves who'd been lost finding their way home in each other. Behind them, the sacred line blazed silver in the moonlight. Stronger than ever. Waiting. Because somewhere out there, other guardians were stirring. Other wolves with marks on their wrists and power in their blood were beginning to wake. And when they did, Marin would be ready. Not as a victim. Not as someone small and afraid. But as exactly what she was meant to be. A guardian who'd reclaimed her power. A wolf who'd chosen love over fear. A survivor who'd turned her breaking point into her breakthrough. And nothing, not counsels, not prophecies, not centuries of lies, would ever make her small again. Would you have chosen her side? Would you have stood with the wolf everyone called broken, knowing it might cost you everything? Would you have seen the power in her when the world only saw danger? Or would you have been one of the voices in the crowd, calling for her exile, her execution, her silence? Because that's the thing about stories like this. They ask us to choose. To decide if we're brave enough to stand with the ones the world tries to erase. To believe in power that doesn't look like what we've been taught to expect. To choose truth even when lies are easier, safer, more convenient. Marin chose herself when no one else would. Frederick chose love when duty demanded otherwise. And together, they rewrote a story 200 years in the making. What would you choose? If this story lit something inside you, if you felt that pull in your chest when she finally claimed her power, when he chose her over his crown, when they stood together against a world that wanted them apart, Then you belong here, at Shayla's Romance Library. Because this is what we do. We tell stories about wolves who refuse to be broken, about love that's fierce enough to burn down empires, about power that comes not from dominance, but from choosing yourself when everyone else wants you small. We tell stories that make you feel, that make you hope, that remind you that even when the world says you're too much or not enough, you're exactly who you're supposed to be. Hit that subscribe button. Because Marin's story? This is just the beginning. There are other guardians waking, other wolves discovering they're more than what they've been told, other love stories waiting to be written in silver flame and moonlight. And we're going to tell every single one. Welcome to Shayla's Romance Library, where the wolves are fierce, the love is real, and the stories burn.